I am in the 24th chapter of the first book of Samuel. To recap, David is on the run still. I'm almost tired of recapping what's going on because he's been on the run for a long time now. King Saul is chasing him, trying to kill him. In the previous chapter, King Saul got distracted as the Philistines invaded the land. So King Saul, left, and David was almost about to get squeezed out, but through God's salvation, if you will, he was able to get away that time as well. So, chapter 24 is the chapter when the tables are starting to turn. And we can tell how God is starting to pull David out of the gutter, right? He's pulling him out of the pit. So in hindsight, chapter 24 is starting to look like it's pivotal in the events that are unfolding. Chapter 24 is also one of those chapters that has deep theological, deep philosophical meaning as far as Christianity is concerned, but not just Christianity. It holds a whole lot of philosophical meaning to society at large, regardless of belief in God. So I will try to explain that. And when reading, at this point, it's just really not worth recapping what is going on, because the text itself here, as I read, you will get the entire idea of where David is in his head, along with King Saul, and also where people are as far as how they think about David and how they think about King Saul. On each side of the spectrum, right? You have the people that are supporting King Saul, and you have David's men who are supporting him. And you will get a really good glimpse into their thinking. So if you haven't watched any of these, it's not that big of a deal, because the text reveals precisely what has been happening over the last 24 chapters, literally, right? So let me just read the first few verses in chapter 24, the first book of Samuel. And once again, I'm reading out of the King James Version. And it came to pass, when Saul was returned from following the Philistines, that it was told him, saying, Behold, David is in the wilderness of En-gedi. Then Saul took 3,000 chosen men out of all Israel, and went to seek David and his men upon the rocks of the wild goats. And he came to the sheepcotes by the way, where was a cave. And Saul went in to cover his feet, and David and his men remained in the sides of the cave. And the men of David said unto him, Behold, the day of which the Lord said unto thee, Behold, I will deliver thine enemy into thine hand, that thou mayest do to him as it shall seem good unto thee. Then David arose and cut off the skirt of Saul's robe privily. And it came to pass afterward that David's heart smote him, because he had cut off Saul's skirt. And he said unto his men, The Lord forbid that I should do this thing unto my master, the Lord's anointed, to stretch forth mine hand against him, seeing he is the anointed of the Lord. So David stayed his servants with these words, and suffered them not to rise against Saul. But Saul rose up out of the cave and went on his way. Okay, so again, this is 17th century English, so it requires a little bit of explanation of what's going on. Of course, you may have read this in one of the newer versions. Good for you. This is a great glimpse into the King James Version, so I believe you would enjoy this. Of course, what's happening here is Saul, once again, returns from fighting the Philistines, and he starts chasing David again. Someone tells him that he's in the wilderness of En-gedi. And he's chasing him with 3,000 men. So once again, if you recall, David at this point has about 600 men. The 3,000 men that are with King Saul, no doubt, are very well-trained soldiers, Benjamites, extraordinarily powerful tribe at that point. Once again, David and his men stand no chance against 3,000 men. As chance, if you will, would have it, David is hiding in caves along with his men. And King Saul, what does King Saul do? There was a cave, and Saul went in to cover his feet, okay? Cover his feet is a euphemism for relieving himself. That's what that means. David and his men are inside the cave, and here's what the men say to David. That's David's men. Behold, the day of which the Lord said unto thee, Behold, I will deliver thine enemy into thine hand, that thou mayest do to him as it shall seem good unto thee. All right? So his men, as I told you, this chapter reveals the entire history of this book. His men clearly know that A, David is anointed, and B, that God has given him specific promises, right? God has given David specific promises, and that is that he will subdue all of his enemies. So, the popularity of David is extraordinary at this point. Everyone knows about him. Once again, defeated Goliath, successful military campaigns, extremely well-known person, obviously very good-looking. Everyone knows who David is. His men tell him, this is the day that God told you about, right? This is the day that God told you about, that he will deliver your enemies to do as you wish with them. So what David does is he cuts, right, off the skirt of Saul's robe privily. So Saul is wearing some sort of a robe, mantle, whatever you want to call it. And then David secretly cuts a piece of it. Privily means secretly. And then what he does next is, and it came to pass afterward that David's heart smote him because he had cut off Saul's skirt. So, heart smote him. The Old Testament does not use the word conscience. That is something that gets introduced much later. We use a phrase in English, and that is guilty conscience. So, his conscience strikes him. The Old Testament, and specifically the King James Version of it, his heart smote him. His heart was struck. He got a guilty conscience feeling. All right? That's what this means. Because he had cut off Saul's skirt, right? The edge of his robe, whatever that robe looked like. And he said unto his men, listen to what he says, and I'll repeat that because this is very important to what is going on in David's head at this point. The Lord forbid that I should do this thing unto my master, the Lord's anointed, to stretch forth my hand against him, seeing he is the anointed of the Lord. So David stayed his servants with these words. He stayed them, he stopped them, and suffered them not. He did not allow them to rise against Saul, but Saul rose up out of the cave and went on his way. Okay? So, first of all, the word anointed is repeated several times, and I'll discuss that in just a second. One thing to remember about David is David was a shepherd, right? David was a shepherd, so he had, outside of fighting bears and lions, as we were told earlier in this book of Samuel, the first book of Samuel, he had plenty of time to read. As I've said this before many times, David is an extremely, extremely well-read man. There's no one on earth that can write poetry about God without knowing God. That just simply does not happen on this earth. Maybe on another planet, but not on this earth. In order for you to write extraordinary, brilliant, fascinating poetry like the Psalms that David wrote, you have to know God. You have to be extremely well-read, very well-educated. So as a shepherd, I suppose, he had plenty of time to read, right? At the time of David, right? At the time of David, David was introduced to more than likely the Torah, right? Those are the first 5 books of the Old Testament, right? We got Genesis, we got Exodus, we got Leviticus, we got Numbers, and we got Deuteronomy. More than likely, he was also introduced to the book of Judges because those judges predated him hundreds of years, right? So what would he have learned in those books, right? What would he have learned in those 5, 6 books? Let's just call it 5 just to let's exclude the book of Judges, say that it was written around his time, right? He would have learned that what? And remember, he's the one who wrote that he meditated on the word of God day and night. The word meditate in the English language comes from the King James Version of the Bible. David predated the Buddhists by hundreds of years. Their writings for sure by at least half a millennium, okay? By at least 500 years. So what does the Torah, what does the Old Testament, what do the first 5 books of the Old Testament tell us? What does God say to Moses? Vengeance belongeth to me. I will recompense, right? David knows that. David knows that vengeance belongs to God. That is also, by the way, repeated later on in the New Testament. So, not just that, it is repeated here twice, right? The Lord forbid. Right? So this is just almost sounds like Paul in his later writings, in his epistles. God forbid, the Lord forbid that I should do this thing unto my master, the Lord's anointed, to stretch forth mine hand against him, seeing he is the anointed of the Lord. So that is repeated, right? As I repeated it twice. Now, what does it mean to be the Lord's anointed? So the Lord's anointed literally means physically that someone, in this case it was the prophet Samuel, the one who supposedly wrote this book, he just literally poured some fancy oil on King Saul's head. That's the literal physical meaning of being anointed, but it doesn't just mean that. It means that God chose him, and it also means that the people, right? The people in that society, they also chose him, all right? Maybe not the majority, but the people in that society, or maybe not all for sure, but the people in that society definitely chose him. And I want to take you back to explain to you how that came to be. So this predates David's rise and the house of David, so I didn't discuss this. But this is still in the book of Samuel, the first book of Samuel. This is in chapter 8. So just to give you a little bit of context of what's going on here. Samuel, the prophet Samuel, is very frustrated with the people. Okay, he's very frustrated with the people, and he is telling God, he's expressing his frustration. And this is the context. So God here talks directly to Samuel. And we have multiple records of God talking directly to Samuel. He calls him by his name several times. And then this is God talking directly to Samuel. And I will be stopping in the middle of verses just to kind of give you an explanation of what these words mean so that you can follow along rather than complete reading and then come back and explain what I just read, because it's easier in this specific paragraph, okay? So God is talking directly to Samuel about that situation, that the people Samuel is frustrated with these people, and then Samuel is telling God they're frustrated, and God is telling him, here's what the deal is. And the Lord said unto Samuel, hearken unto the voice of the people. And you will know when I stop reading, because I sure don't sound like I'm from the 17th century. Hearken means listen, right? That's what hearken means. Hearken means listen. And the Lord said unto Samuel, hearken unto the voice of the people in all that they say unto thee. For they have not rejected thee, but they have rejected me. This is God speaking to Samuel. They haven't rejected you. Don't worry about it. They've rejected me. That I should not reign over them, right? That I should not rule over them. According to all the works which they have done since the day that I brought them up out of Egypt, even unto this day, wherewith they have forsaken me. They've abandoned me, right? And served other gods. So do they also unto thee. Now, therefore, hearken unto their voice, right? What is God telling Samuel? Listen to these people who want a king. They want a king. That's the whole idea. They want a king. They don't want to be ruled by God. They want a king. Now, therefore, hearken unto their voice, howbeit yet protest solemnly unto them. I love this. I mean, this is just beautiful language. So God is telling Samuel, howbeit, but, right? But, that's what it means, howbeit, but protest solemnly unto them. Protest unto them and show them the manner of the king that shall reign over them. Show them what kind of king I'm going to give them, okay? You just go ahead and tell them they're going to get their king, but just show them what kind of king they're going to get. And Samuel told all the words of the Lord unto the people that asked of him a king. So God tells Samuel, and we'll understand here in just a second what God told Samuel, and God tells him, go tell these people. So Samuel goes and tell these people the words of God and what kind of the people that asked for a king. And he said, this will be the manner of the king that shall reign over you. This is the kind of king you're going to get. He will take your sons and appoint them for himself, for his chariots, and to be his horsemen, and some shall run before his chariots. And he will appoint him captains over thousands and captains over 50s, and will set them to ear his ground, and to reap his harvest, and to make his instruments of war and instruments of his chariots. And he will take your daughters to be confectionaries, and to be cooks, and to be bakers. And he will take your fields, and your vineyards, and your olive yards, even the best of them, and give them to his servants. Oh boy. And he will take the 10th of your seed and of your vineyards, and give to his officers and to his servants. And he will take your men servants and your maid servants and your goodliest young men and your asses. That means donkeys, not take your asses. And put them to his work. He will take the 10th of your sheep, and you shall be his servants. And ye shall cry out in that day because of your king, which ye shall have chosen you. And the Lord will not hear you in that day. Nevertheless, the people refused to obey the voice of Samuel, and they said, nay, but we will have a king over us. Okay. So what God is telling Samuel is that he's going to give them a king, all right? And he does give them a king. That king, his name is King Saul. He anoints him, and he becomes king over that nation, right? What he's explaining is what we observe every single day in our society, isn't it? Right? To this day, in every society, it doesn't matter what society it is, the king takes the best, takes a percentage. He gets wealthy off of us, right? The king, the queen, the prime minister, the president, it doesn't matter. There's a massive amount of, what is he describing here? He's going to take the best of your vineyards, the 10th, right? A 10th. He's going to literally take 10%. 10% of everything. That 10%, remember, is not just arbitrary number. The 10% was originally meant to be given to God. Give 10%. God is saying he will take 10%, and on top of that, he's going to what? He's going to take your sons, and he's going to put them in armies to go die in battles. Does that happen at all today? No, it sure doesn't, right? I'm being sarcastic over here. He's going to take your daughters, and they're going to be cooking, and they're going to be confectionaries. And then he's going to take your harvests. He's going to put men over his chariots. They're going to be running in front of him. He's essentially describing a world system that we live in. Regardless of what country you live in, this is what you get, right? But there's a very deep theological, from a Christian standpoint, but also philosophical from a worldview standpoint, meaning behind the words that God tells Samuel, and then ultimately those people. He's saying the following, and I would hope that you understand this, because this is applicable at any given point in any society, regardless of where it is on earth, whether it's a democracy, whether it's whatever you want to call it, right? Some autocrat running a country, it's exactly the same. It doesn't matter, because no government is ultimately in a vacuum, right? It has support of the people. Just like these people wanted a king, so do people on earth today want their king, right? What the deeper philosophical meaning of this is that ultimately these people, right? Ultimately these people, they have rejected what is the absolute truth. This book is very clear. That there is someone and there is something that is the absolute truth, right? And I want to just give you a little bit of before I come back to this argument, because it is a very important argument for people to understand, I want to tell you the book that precedes the book of Samuel, outside of the book of Ruth, is the book of Judges. And this is how the book of Judges ends. In those days, there was no king in Israel. Every man did that which was right in his own eyes. Okay? What this is telling you is that these people have for a long time now, hundreds of years, rejected what is absolutely true. So they do what is right in their own eyes. They not only do what is right in their own eyes, they believe what is right in their own eyes. That is the definition of rejection of what is referred to as absolute truth. So whenever you reject absolute truth, when you don't believe in absolute truth, what God gives us is relative truth. So how do I explain relative truth, right? Relative truth is one of those arguments that people make whenever you try to convince them that something is true, and they tell you, I believe and live in my own truth. Don't convince me, and go ahead and live in your truth, because we live in a different truth, okay? That's just conceptually what it means to live in relative truth. Everyone's got their own truth. Everyone does what is right in their own eyes. And this has been going on for hundreds of years, just like today in a society where there have been philosophers for what now almost 200 years that are convincing us that there is no absolute truth. We live in an environment where there's relative truth, right? You live your own truth. I live my own truth. Let's not just make arguments here that I'm right and you're wrong, right? There's a huge problem with that. And that problem is that whenever you live in relative truth, how could you then argue against your king who also lives in relative truth, right? He also shares your ideology. You cannot say, and you cannot hide behind your vote and say, well, this is not my president because I'm not ideologically aligned with him or with her. Yes, you are. You're 100% ideologically aligned with him or her, right? There's nothing ideologically nothing differentiates people more than whether they believe in absolute truth or not. Ideologically, those who do not believe in absolute truth, they live in relative truth. So how can you then say, I don't agree with him, he is not my president? Of course he is, right? I mean, ultimately, he does the exact same thing that you do. He believes in his own truth. How could you hide behind a vote and say, well, I didn't vote for that, he's not my president, when ideologically you're 100% aligned, right? 100% aligned. You believe in the exact same thing. That's what this story is all about. This story is all about how people live in their own truth. It's their own truth. But then we say, he's a liar. Why? Because his truth doesn't agree with your truth, and only you accept someone because your truths cross paths somehow, right? That's exactly what this story is about. And he literally tells you that this person is going to, in front of your eyes, he's going to steal, right? This is describing corruption. He's giving the best to his own servants, right? He's a corrupt king. That's what it is. But people are so shocked. Well, why are you shocked? You believe in the exact same thing. How can your truth be the same as his truth if you live in relative truth? If both of you rejected absolute truth, then of course you're going to differ in how you distribute wealth. Of course he's going to distribute wealth the way he sees fits, and that may not fit you, right? Very simple argument that's been around for 3,000 years. Now we know King Saul does not believe in absolute truth. Why? Because, and we're going to find out here in just a second. These people tell him, first of all, let's just find that out. What happens next? So this is starting in verse 8, chapter 24. David also arose afterward and went out of the cave and cried after Saul, saying, My Lord the king. And when Saul looked behind him, David stooped with his face to the earth and bowed himself. And David said to Saul, Wherefore hearest thou men's words, saying, Behold, David seeketh thy hurt? Behold, this day thine eyes have seen how that the Lord had delivered thee today into mine hand in the cave, and some bade me kill thee. But mine eye spared thee, and I said, I will not put forth mine hand against my Lord, for he is the Lord's anointed. Moreover, my father, see the skirt of thy robe in my hand. For in that I cut off the skirt of thy robe, and killed thee not. Know thou and see that there is neither evil nor transgression in mine hand, and I have not sinned against thee. Yet thou huntest my soul to take it. The Lord judge between me and thee, and the Lord avenge me of thee, but mine hand shall not be upon thee. As saith the proverb of the ancients, wickedness proceeded from the wicked, but mine hand shall not be upon thee. After whom is the king of Israel come out? After whom dost thou pursue? After a dead dog? After a flea? The Lord therefore be judge, and judge between me and thee, and see, and plead my cause, and deliver me out of thine hand. Typical Davidic logic here, as I've discussed many times. His arguments are just jam-packed with logic, signature speaking, right? So what is he telling King Saul? Why do you believe? First of all, he's saying, why are you listening to what people are telling you? King Saul believes in lies, folks. He believes in lies. David specifically calls him out, right? Wherefore hearest thou men's words, saying, Behold, David seeketh thy hurt? Why are you listening to people telling you that David is trying to hurt you? Behold, this day thine eyes have seen how that the Lord had delivered thee today into mine hand. David is saying, look, I could have lopped your head off. Instead, I cut, here's a piece of your robe, right? While you were covering your feet. And I spared your life, even though the Lord delivered me into your hands, right? And this is almost one of those chapters where you're kind of thinking, man, is God testing David's patience? Is God testing David's faith? Is God testing David's knowledge of God himself? But we would never accuse God of doing that, are we now? Nope, we never are. Yet, we see that let's just pretend that he was getting tested. God would never do that, but he passed 100%, right? He calls him God's anointed. He shows him logically here, why are you listening to lies? Why do you believe in lies? Why do you believe in lies, right? Clearly, King Saul is one of those who believes in relative truth, and of course he does. We saw that in the last chapter, right? Or the one before, I don't remember anymore, but he is bribing people to commit evil, okay? He's bribing them to commit evil. This is typical, textbook, right? Corrupt leader, textbook. He lives in his own truth, right? But David, first of all, knows that vengeance belongeth to God. That's number one. And also he knows that the people wanted that, all right? It's his people. They wanted that. And God gave them what they wanted. Therefore, he's their anointed. So he's got respect for that. He doesn't just have respect for God. He doesn't just have respect for King Saul. And of course he has respect for King Saul, right? I mean, he played the instrument for him to calm him down. They have a long history. He loves him, regardless of whether that guy is lost his marbles and is trying to kill him. This is just all this is talking about, right? The Lord judge between me and thee, right? And the Lord avenge me of thee. Boom, right there. He just straight up explicitly says it, right? The Lord avenge me of thee, right? Wickedness, what is the proverb of the ancients? Wickedness proceeded from the wicked, but my hand shall not be upon thee. Brilliant, right? Brilliant argument. And then finally he's saying, what are you pursuing? Who are you after? You are the king, for crying out loud. Wake up, wake up. Why are you chasing after me? I'm a dead dog. I'm a flea, right? He's making an extraordinary argument right here. I mean, ultimately, King Saul is the anointed king at that point in time. Why is he chasing someone who wishes him no harm, let alone seeking his hurt, right? So he's making very logical arguments. I don't know. I love this chapter. I mean, it is pivotal ultimately, no matter how you look at it. Things turn around for David, but again, you can tell what's going through his head. You can tell his extraordinary knowledge of God and, of course, of God's word. All right, how does this chapter end? Here it goes. And it came to pass when David had made an end of speaking these words unto Saul, that Saul said, Is this thy voice, my son David? And Saul lifted up his voice and wept. And he said to David, "Thou art more righteous than I, for thou hast rewarded me good, whereas I have rewarded thee evil. And thou hast showed this day how that thou hast dealt well with me, for as much as when the Lord had delivered me into thine hand, thou killest me not. For if a man find his enemy, will he let him go well away? Wherefore the Lord reward thee good for that thou hast done unto me this day. And now, behold, I know well that thou shalt surely be king, and that the kingdom of Israel shall be established in thine hand. Swear now, therefore, unto me by the Lord that thou wilt not cut off my seed after me, and that thou wilt not destroy my name out of my father's house." And David sware unto Saul, and Saul went home, but David and his men gat them up unto the hold, right? So they go back hiding into the strongholds. And this is one of the glimpses where you can tell that King Saul is not well, right? He's just simply not well. It's very, very sad. These two have a long history. As I mentioned before, David played an instrument for him to calm him down. You can tell that there's some sort of a bipolar, if you will, issue going on. I don't know how to describe this, but King Saul ultimately repents. He realizes that what he's doing is just flat out wrong in this case, right? So you can tell the sadness in his heart, right? He's saying, "David, my son," he cries, "you're more righteous than I am," right? I mean, very sad moment, and I don't know. He is a horror story. He's a very sad story. Ultimately, he's hopefully someone people can learn from. I can almost feel his pain, and I can almost feel the pain that David feels for King Saul, right? So they strike another covenant here. David is not going to cut off the seed of King Saul. He's going to, and of course, he mourns him after his death. You have to have a whole lot of respect for someone like David, right? And what he does for King Saul, and then what he does for those who survive, those of King Saul's family that survive afterwards. So, yeah, and I don't know, beautiful chapter, pivotal chapter. What happens next is actually we get a break. Believe it or not, we get a break. And that break is whenever David meets Abigail. So I will be talking about David meeting Abigail next time. May you guys be blessed. Thank you so much for listening. Have a great, whatever it is, day and night. See you next time.